The text from Celia arrived at exactly 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had already gone to hell in a handbasket. Ma wants you for dinner tonight. 7 sharp. Don't be late. Nothing says I love you like a summons from the dawn. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stared at my phone screen, watching the cursor blink in the reply field like a tiny middle finger. 22 years of marriage, and my wife still communicated with me like I was her personal assistant, a particularly dim one at that. My name is Nick Ferris, and at 44, I've learned that life has a twisted sense of humor. I'm an IT consultant in Millbrook, Connecticut, one of those picture-perfect New England towns where everyone drives luxury cars they can't afford and gossips about neighbors they secretly hate. The kind of place where your biggest scandal is using the wrong fork at the country club. Or so I thought. I pulled into Livia Moretti's circular driveway at 6:58 p.m., because being early would somehow be worse than being late. The old Victorian mansion loomed before me like something out of a Gothic novel, all dark shutters and judgmental windows. Celia's mother had inherited it from her late husband, along with his construction fortune and his talent for making people feel like insects under a magnifying glass. Celia's BMW was already there, gleaming white in the driveway like a pearl in an oyster shell. My 10-year-old Honda looked embarrassed, parked next to it. The front door opened before I could knock. Livia Moretti stood there in all her 62-year-old glory, silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it could crack walnuts, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Nicholas," she said, pronouncing my name like it was a disease. "You're almost late." "Almost doesn't count, Ma," I replied, stepping into the foyer that smelled like expensive perfume and old money, except in horseshoes and hand grenades. She didn't laugh. Livia never laughed at my jokes. Celia emerged from the kitchen looking stunning as always. At 40, she still turned heads wherever she went. Auburn hair that caught light like spun copper, green eyes that could sell ice to Eskimos, and a smile that had once made me forget my own name. She worked as marketing director at Prestige Motors, the town's luxury car dealership, and she dressed the part. Tonight, she wore a cream-colored silk blouse and black slacks that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Hi, honey," she said, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. Her lips felt cold. "Ladies," I said, following them into the dining room where Livia had set her grandmother's china. The good stuff. Either someone was getting married, or someone was getting buried. Drea Castellano was already seated at the table, because of course she was, Celia's best friend since high school. Drea was the kind of woman who collected gossip like some people collected stamps, 41 years old, twice divorced, and permanently bitter about both experiences. She worked as a receptionist at the same dealership as Celia, which meant she knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Nick!" Drea exclaimed with fake enthusiasm. "How's the computer business?" "Thriving," I said, taking my designated seat. Nothing like other people's technological incompetence to keep me in business. Livia served her famous buco, and for the first 20 minutes, conversation stayed safely neutral. The weather, local politics, the neighbor's new fence that was apparently 6 inches too tall according to homeowner association regulations. Then Drea opened her mouth. "Celia's been working so hard lately," she said, cutting her V with surgical precision. "All those late nights at the dealership? The dedication is really paying off, though. Mr. Patterson is very impressed with her performance." Something in her tone made my radar ping. I glanced at Celia, who was suddenly very interested in her wine glass. "Late nights?" I asked. "I thought you said you were having dinner with clients." "I am," Celia said quickly. "Drea just means the whole process. You know how it is with luxury car sales. Everything happens after regular business hours." Livia nodded approvingly. My Celia has always been ambitious, Not like some people who are content to fix computers all day. The barb hit its mark, but I developed thick skin over the years. Someone has to keep the world running. Ma can't all be selling overpriced cars to people having midlife crises. Drea giggled. Actually giggled, like I'd said something hilarious.
Oh, Nick, you're so funny.
They exchanged a look, one of those quick, meaningful glances that women think men don't notice. But I'd been married long enough to catch it. What's so amusing? I asked.
Nothing,
Celia said.
Drea just thinks you're witty.
Witty like a court jester? Livia muttered in Italian, probably thinking I couldn't understand her. Here's the thing about growing up in an Italian neighborhood in Boston. You pick up the language whether you want to or not. I'd been listening to Livia insult me in Italian for 2 decades, and she had no idea I understood every word. Allo, Ileniva, I replied smoothly. At least the court jester got paid to entertain. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Livia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Drea's eyes went wide. Celia looked like she'd swallowed her tongue.
You speak Italian?
Livia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Fluently, I said, taking a sip of wine. Have for about 15 years. Funny how much you learn when you pay attention. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clink of silverware against china. I could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads, wondering what else I'd understood over the years. As we cleared the dishes, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I heard voices from the kitchen, Celia and Drea speaking in hushed tones.
Have to be more careful, Celia was saying. If he's been understanding everything, relax, Drea replied.
He's clueless about the important stuff. Just keep playing the devoted wife until after the bonus comes through. Then we can figure out how to handle the idiot. My blood turned to ice water. The idiot. That would be me. I stood frozen in the hallway, straining to hear more, but they'd moved on to discussing someone's new hairstyle. Whatever the important stuff was, they weren't talking about it now. I rejoined them in the kitchen, plastering on my best oblivious husband smile. Great dinner, Ma. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, Nicholas,
Livia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. The drive home was quiet. Celia stared out the passenger window, lost in thought. I wanted to ask her what she and Drea had been whispering about, but something held me back. Call it intuition. Call it 22 years of marriage. Call it the sick feeling in my gut that told me I really didn't want to know the answer. You never told me you spoke Italian, Celia said as we pulled into our driveway. You never asked, I replied. Besides, I thought it might be useful to understand what your mother really thinks of me. She doesn't mean anything by it. It's just her way, right? Her way of calling me a worthless fool who doesn't deserve her precious daughter. Celia didn't deny it. We went to bed that night without saying another word. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Celia's breathing beside me, wondering what else I'd been missing. What other conversations had happened right under my nose? What was this bonus she'd mentioned? And why did I suddenly feel like a stranger in my own life? The next morning started like any other. Celia left for work at 7:30, sharp, coffee in hand, designer heels clicking across the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. She kissed my cheek, the same pre-functor peck she'd been giving me for months, and disappeared into her BMW without a backward glance. I worked from my home office that day, troubleshooting network issues for a law firm downtown. Boring work, but it paid the bills and let me set my own schedule. Around noon, I decided to surprise Celia with lunch. Call it a peace offering after the awkward dinner at her mother's. Prestige Motors sat on the corner of Main and Elm, all glass and chrome, designed to make customers feel like they were entering a temple of automotive worship. The showroom displayed the kind of cars that cost more than most people's houses. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, the sort of vehicles that screamed, "I have more money than sense." I found Celia in her office, door closed, talking animatedly on the phone. Through the glass wall, I could see her gesturing with her free hand, smiling that brilliant smile that had once been reserved for me. "No, Thursday won't work," she was saying as I knocked and entered. "I have that thing with my husband. How about Friday?" She looked up, startled, and quickly ended the call. "Nick, what are you doing here?" "Brought you lunch," I said, holding up the bag from her favorite sandwich shop. "Thought we could eat together." "That's sweet, but I'm swamped today. Rain check?" I glanced around her office. Her desk was relatively clear, except for a few brochures and her computer. "Doesn't look that busy." "Appearances can be deceiving," she said, taking the bag. "Thanks for this, though. I'll eat it later." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. I'd been married long enough to recognize the signs. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "A client, very demanding. You know how it is, right?" The late-night dinner crowd. Something flickered in her eyes. Exactly. I kissed her goodbye and headed for the door, but something made me turn back. "By the way, what's this bonus you mentioned to Drea? Did you get a promotion?" The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. "Bonus? Last night in your mother's kitchen, you said something about waiting until after the bonus comes through." "Oh, that," she forced a laugh. "It's nothing definite, just hoping for a good quarterly review. You know how these things go." But I didn't know. In all our years together, Celia had never been secretive about work. She usually told me everything, sometimes more than I wanted to hear. I spent the rest of the day with a nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong. That evening, I decided to do a little investigating. Not snooping, I told myself, just paying attention. Celia's purse sat on the kitchen counter where she always left it. Inside, I found the usual suspects: wallet, keys, makeup, breath mints. But tucked into a side pocket was something that made my heart skip a beat. A man's watch. Expensive gold, engraved on the back. To VH. Always. C. VH. Very handsy, probably. Or maybe very horny. Either way, it wasn't mine. I put the watch back exactly where I'd found it and went to my office. Time to do what I did best: dig through digital breadcrumbs. Celia wasn't particularly tech-savvy, which worked in my favor. She used the same password for everything. Maddie, 2005. Our daughter's name and birth year. Maddie was away at college now, a freshman at NYU studying journalism. Smart kid, smarter than her old man, apparently. Celia's email yielded nothing interesting. Work correspondence, shopping confirmations, social media notifications. But her text messages were a different story. The most recent thread was with someone listed as V in her contacts. The messages made my stomach turn. V, can't wait to see you tonight. Same place. Celia, 7:30. Don't be late. V wouldn't miss it. You know what you do to me. Celia, save it for later, Tiger. The timestamp showed yesterday, the same day she'd had dinner at her mother's house. The same day she'd supposedly been working late with clients. I scrolled up through weeks of messages, dozens of them, plans to meet, intimate conversations, photos I definitely didn't want to see. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how long it had been going on. Based on the message history, Celia had been cheating for at least 3 months, maybe longer. My hands were shaking as I closed the phone. 22 years of marriage. 22 years of thinking I knew the woman sleeping next to me every night. 22 years of being played for a fool. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my office chair staring at nothing. The house felt different now, smaller, like the walls were closing in. Around midnight, Celia came home. I heard her car in the driveway, her heels on the front steps, the jingle of keys. She moved quietly through the house, probably thinking I was asleep. "How was work?" I called out as she passed my office. She jumped like she'd been shot.
Jesus, Nick, you scared me. I thought you were in bed.
Couldn't sleep. How was the client dinner?
Fine. Boring, actually, just business.
She was already backing toward the stairs.
I'm exhausted. See you in the morning.
Sure thing, sweetheart. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard the shower running, washing off the evidence, probably. The thought made me sick. I spent the rest of the night planning, not revenge, not yet. But I needed to know more. Who was VH? How serious was this? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't particularly noble, but it was mine. The first step was finding out who VH was. That turned out to be easier than expected. A quick search of local business licenses revealed Vincent Hart, real estate agent and pillar of the community, 49 years old, married to Julia Hart, father of 2 grown children. His photo on the Millbrook Really website showed a man who clearly spent too much time at the gym and not enough time developing a personality. Vincent Hart, Vince to his friends, V to my wife. I'd met him a few times at town events, glad-handing, backs slapping, the kind of guy who called everyone buddy because he couldn't be bothered to remember their names. He drove a silver Porsche and wore suits that cost more than my car, the kind of man who thought the world owed him everything and everyone else was just there to provide it. Well, Vincent Hart was about to learn that some people don't pay their debts quietly. I followed Celia the next evening, staying 3 cars back like they do in the movies. She drove to the Millbrook Inn, a boutique hotel on the edge of town that catered to wealthy travelers and locals looking for discretion. The parking lot was dimly lit, perfect for clandestine meetings. Celia's BMW pulled up next to a silver Porsche. Even from a distance, I could see the personalized plates, Vart 1, subtle as a brick through a window. I parked behind a delivery truck and watched as Vince Hart climbed out of his car. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the evening breeze. The kind of man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for expensive scotch. Celia emerged from her car wearing a red dress I'd never seen before. Something told me it hadn't come from the local department store. They embraced in the parking lot like lovers in a romance novel, all passion and desperate longing. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. If this was going to end badly, and it was, I wanted evidence. They disappeared into the hotel, arms around each other's waists. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, rage building in my chest like a pressure cooker. 22 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. In a hotel parking lot, watching my wife walk away with another man. But rage, I discovered, could be a useful emotion. It burned away the hurt and the self-pity, leaving behind something harder, something that wanted payback. I got out of my car and walked across the parking lot. The Porsche was unlocked, because why would anyone steal from Vincent Hart? I opened the driver's door and looked around. The interior was all leather and polished wood, the kind of ostentation that screamed, "I'm compensating for something." In the glove compartment, I found registration papers, insurance documents, and a small silver flask engraved with his initials. I unscrewed the cap and took a sniff. Expensive whiskey. The good stuff. I poured it all over his leather seats. Next, I walked around to the trunk of my Honda and retrieved my emergency kit. Every IT guy carries one. Screwdrivers, wire strippers, electrical tape, and keys. Lots of keys. The longest key made a beautiful sound as it scraped along the Porsche's pristine paint job from headlight to taillight, both sides. Deep grooves that would cost thousands to repair. Cheater looked particularly artistic, spray-painted across the windshield. I was admiring my handiwork when the hotel's front door opened. Vince Hart emerged alone, probably heading to his car for something. He stopped dead when he saw the damage, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. What the hell? He spun around looking for the culprit, and his eyes landed on me. You! What did you do to my car? I improved it, I said, walking toward him. Added some character, some honesty. You're that computer guy, Nick something. Nick Ferris, Celia's husband. You know, the woman you've been screwing for the past 3 months. His face went pale, then red. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, Vince. Can I call you Vince? Or do you prefer V? That's what Celia calls you in her text messages. Very intimate stuff. Very detailed. He glanced toward the hotel entrance, probably worried about Celia seeing this confrontation. Look, buddy. I'm not your buddy. I stepped closer, and he backed up against his ruined car. I'm the guy whose wife you've been playing house with. I'm the guy whose marriage you destroyed. And I'm the guy who's going to make you pay for it. You're crazy. I'll call the police. Go ahead. I'll show them the photos I took of you and Celia groping each other in this parking lot. I'll show them the text messages. I'll show them the watch she's been carrying around with your initials on it. I smiled, and it felt like broken glass. How do you think your wife Julia will react to all that evidence? The color drained from his face. You wouldn't try me. For a moment, we stood there staring at each other. Middle-aged men acting like teenagers, all posturing and wounded pride. Then Vince made a mistake. He shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, just enough to make me stumble backward, but it was enough. I'd taken boxing lessons in my 20s, back when I thought I might need to defend myself someday. Turns out, I was right. My right hand caught him across the jaw with a satisfying crack. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to send him sprawling across the hood of his Porsche. Stay away from my wife, I said, standing over him. Stay away from my family. And if you even think about retaliating, remember that I know where you live, where you work, and where you like to take other men's wives for romantic evenings. I walked back to my car, leaving him bleeding from his lip and examining the damage to his precious Porsche. My knuckles hurt, but it was a good hurt, the kind that reminded you that you weren't completely helpless. As I drove away, I saw Celia emerge from the hotel. Even from a distance, I could see her confusion as she took in the scene. Vince on the ground, his car destroyed, the smell of expensive whiskey in the air. I rolled down my window and waved at her as I passed. The look on her face was worth every penny the divorce would cost me. But I wasn't thinking about divorce anymore. I was thinking about revenge, and Vincent Hart had just given me all the motivation I needed. I called my best friend Pete Kowalski the next morning. Pete owned a garage on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where working-class guys went to get their cars fixed without getting ripped off. He was 45, built like a refrigerator, and had been my friend since high school. More importantly, he had no love for rich guys who thought the world owed them something. You did what? Pete asked, nearly choking on his coffee. We were sitting in his office, which was really just a corner of the garage, separated from the work bays by a glass partition. The place smelled like motor oil and honest work. I keyed his car and punched him in the face, I repeated, and I'd do it again. Pete leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. Nick, buddy, I've known you for 30 years. You've never punched anybody in your life. There's a first time for everything. Damn right there is. He grinned. How'd it feel? Better than I expected, but it's not enough. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the text messages between Celia and Vince. Pete's expression darkened as he read. Son of a, he muttered. How long has this been going on? At least 3 months, maybe longer. And Pete, I think there's more to it than just the affair. I told him about the conversation I'd overheard at Livia's house, about the mysterious bonus, about the way Celia and Drea had been acting. Pete listened without interrupting, his face getting redder with each detail. So, what's the plan? He asked when I finished. I want to destroy them. Both of them.
Celia and Vince. I want to take everything they care about and burn it to the ground.
Pete nodded slowly. I'm in. What do you need? We spent the next 2 hours planning. Pete knew everyone in town. Mechanics, contractors, bartenders, waitresses, the kind of people who saw everything and remembered even more. If there were secrets to be uncovered, Pete's network would find them. My job was the digital side. Phone records, social media, email accounts, anything that could be hacked, traced, or exposed. What about Drea? Pete asked. She's in on this too, right? Oh, Drea is going down with the ship, I said. But first, let's focus on the captain and first mate. That afternoon, I put the first part of our plan into motion. I created a fake email account and sent a message to Julia Hart, Vince's wife. The subject line read, "Something you should know about your husband." The message was simple. Check his phone. Look for messages from someone named C. You'll find them interesting. I didn't sign it, didn't provide any additional context, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Next, I called Prestige Motors and asked for Celia. When she came to the phone, I could hear the tension in her voice.
Nick, what's wrong? You never call me at work.
Just wanted to hear your voice, I said. How's your day going? Fine, busy, the usual. Any interesting clients today? A pause. No, why? Just curious. You seemed stressed when you got home last night. Thought maybe you'd had a difficult dinner meeting. It was fine, Nick. Look, I really need to get back to work. Of course. Love you, sweetheart. Love you too. The words sounded hollow coming from both of us. That evening, I intercepted Celia's phone while she was in the shower. The text thread with Vince was explosive. Vince, your psycho husband destroyed my car and assaulted me. This has to stop. Celia, he knows. Vince, he knows everything. The hotels, the messages, all of it. Celia, what are we going to do? Vince, I don't know. Julia's been asking questions. Someone sent her an anonymous email. Celia, this is a disaster. What about the plan, Vince? Forget the plan. We need to lay low until this blows over. Celia, we can't stop now. Not when we're so close. The plan. There it was again. Whatever they were plotting, it was bigger than just an affair. I forwarded the entire conversation to my own phone, then deleted the evidence from Celia's message history. Let them think they were being careful. The next morning brought the first sign that my psychological warfare was working. I was having coffee in the kitchen when Celia came downstairs, already dressed for work. She looked like she hadn't slept. We need to talk, she said, sitting across from me at the breakfast table. About what? About us? About our marriage? I think we should consider counseling. I almost laughed. After months of cheating, now she wanted to work on our relationship. That's an interesting suggestion, I said. What brought this on? We've been growing apart. I can feel it. Maybe if we talk to someone, a professional, someone objective. Exactly. I nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're right. We should definitely talk to someone. Get everything out in the open. No more secrets. The relief on her face was almost comical. She thought she was manipulating me, steering me toward a solution that would let her control the narrative. Poor Celia. She had no idea what was coming. I'll make some calls, she said. Find someone good. That would be great, honey. I'm looking forward to it. She kissed my forehead, the first genuine affection she'd shown me in weeks, and headed for the door. I watched her BMW disappear down the street, then called Pete. Phase 1 is complete, I told him. Time for Phase 2. What's Phase 2? We're going to give them exactly what they want. A chance to tell their side of the story in front of the whole town. Pete chuckled. You're starting to scare me, buddy. In a good way. Good, because we're just getting started. The annual Millbrook Charity Gala was the social event of the season. Every year, the town's elite gathered at the country club to bid on donated items, eat overpriced chicken, and congratulate themselves on their generosity. This year's cause was literacy programs for underprivileged children, a worthy cause that would look good on everyone's social media feeds. Celia had been planning to attend for months. She'd bought a new dress, made hair appointments, coordinated with Drea about transportation. It was the kind of event where she could network, schmoo with potential clients, and show off her success. It was also the perfect venue for a public execution. I'd volunteered to help with the audio-visual setup, which gave me access to the sound system, projectors, and wireless network. The event coordinator, a harried woman named Susan, was grateful for any technical help she could get. "The microphones have been acting up all week," she explained as I tested the equipment, "and we're live streaming the auction portion, so everything needs to work perfectly." "Don't worry," I assured her. "I'll make sure everyone hears every word." Celia arrived at 7 sharp, stunning in a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves in all the right places. She'd had her hair done in an elegant updo, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like a woman who had everything under control. She had no idea her world was about to implode. Vince Hart made his entrance 20 minutes later, playing the part of the successful businessman. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his smile practiced and confident. He worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and making small talk. The bandage on his lip from our parking lot encounter was barely visible. Julia Hart was conspicuously absent. According to Pete's sources, she'd been asking a lot of questions about her husband's recent behavior. The anonymous email had done its job. The evening proceeded normally through cocktails and dinner. I sat at a table in the back, watching Celia charm potential clients while Drea hung on her every word. They were in their element, 2 small-town social climbers who thought they were playing in the big leagues. Around 9, the auction began. Items ranged from vacation packages to artwork donated by local artists. The bidding was spirited but civilized. Exactly what you'd expect from people with more money than sense. I waited until the crowd was relaxed, wallets open, attention focused on the stage. Then, I activated my surprise. The first image appeared on the main projection screen behind the auctioneer. It was a text message thread between Celia and Vince, blown up large enough for everyone in the room to read. "Vince can't stop thinking about last night. You drive me crazy. Celia, save some energy for tonight. I have plans for you." The auctioneer stopped mid-sentence. The room fell silent, except for the whisper of fabric as 300 heads turned to look at the screen. "Technical difficulties," I announced from my position at the sound booth. "Give me just a moment to fix this." But instead of fixing it, I advanced to the next slide. This one showed a photo of Vince and Celia kissing in the hotel parking lot, taken with my phone's telephoto lens. Someone gasped. Someone else started whispering. I could see Celia at her table, face white with shock, frantically gesturing for me to stop. "Actually," I said, taking the wireless microphone, "I think everyone should see this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the real Celia Ferris and Vincent Hart." The next slide was a compilation of text messages spanning 3 months. Intimate conversations, meeting arrangements, explicit photos that I'd carefully censored but left suggestive enough to get the point across. "My wife has been having an affair," I announced to the stunned crowd, with a married man in hotel rooms paid for with money that should have gone to their families. Vince was on his feet now, trying to push through the crowd toward the stage, but Pete had positioned himself and several of his friends strategically around the room. Vince found his path blocked by 250 pounds of angry mechanic. "This is private," Celia shouted from her table.
"You have no right."
"I have every right," I replied, clicking to the next slide. "This is my marriage, my life, my humiliation. And now it's everyone else's entertainment. The new slide showed bank records I'd obtained through some creative hacking. Charges at expensive restaurants, hotels, jewelry stores, all on dates when Celia had claimed to be working late. But wait, I said, channeling my inner game show host. There's more. The final slide was a screenshot of an email I'd found buried in Celia's deleted folder. It was addressed to Vince and contained detailed plans for something called Project Windfall. It seems the affair was just the beginning, I announced. They've been planning to embezzle money from Prestige Motors. My wife and her lover weren't just cheating on their spouses. They were planning to steal from their employer. The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, pointing, taking pictures with their phones. The live stream was still running, broadcasting everything to the internet. Within minutes, it would be all over social media. Vince finally broke free from Pete's blockade and rushed the stage. "You son of a bitch!" he screamed, lunging for me. I stepped aside at the last second, and Vince's momentum carried him straight into the auction display table. He crashed through a collection of donated artwork, sending paint and canvas flying everywhere. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the ballroom as he landed face first in what had once been a sculpture of a swan. The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Someone started chanting, "Jerry, Jerry," like we were on a daytime talk show. Celia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. Drea had abandoned her, disappearing into the crowd like the fair-weather friend she'd always been. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, "I present to you the real Vincent Hart, cheater, thief, and apparently performance artist." Vince struggled to his feet, covered in paint and plaster dust, his expensive tuxedo ruined. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over." "Oh, but it is," I replied. "Your wife knows, your business partners know, the whole town knows, and thanks to the magic of live streaming, the whole internet knows. You're finished, Vince." Security finally arrived, 2 off-duty police officers who'd been hired to work the event, but instead of arresting me, they were trying not to laugh. "Sir," one of them said to Vince, "I think you should leave." "Arrest him?" Vince demanded, pointing at me. "He assaulted me. He destroyed my car." "I see a man who tripped and fell into some artwork," the officer replied. "As for your car, that's a civil matter. You'll have to file a report." As Vince was escorted out, still covered in paint and shouting threats, I turned my attention to Celia. She was sitting alone at her table now, abandoned by her friends and exposed to the world. 22 years, I said, walking over to her. 22 years of marriage, and this is how it ends. In front of everyone we know, with you crying into your overpriced dinner. "Nick, please," she whispered. "Can we talk about this at home?" "Home?" I laughed. "Sweetheart, after tonight, you don't have a home. You have a mortgage on a house that belongs to a man who never wants to see you again." I walked away, leaving her sitting there in her ruined makeup and expensive dress, while 300 people took pictures and videos that would follow her for the rest of her life. The best part? The charity auction raised more money that night than any previous year. Nothing like a good public humiliation to open people's wallets. As I packed up my equipment, Susan, the event coordinator, approached me. "That was..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Memorable." "I aim to please," I replied. "The live stream crashed our servers. We've had over 50,000 views in the past hour." "Modern technology," I said. "Isn't it wonderful?" She shook her head and walked away, probably wondering how she'd explain this in her event report. I drove home alone, windows down, feeling better than I had in months. The night air was cool and clean, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. But this was just the beginning. Celia and Vince had humiliated me, betrayed me, and tried to steal from their employer. They'd called me an idiot and thought they could play me for a fool. Now they were about to learn what this particular fool was capable of when he set his mind to revenge. The video went viral overnight. By morning, Millbrook Charity Gala Meltdown was trending on 3 different social media platforms. The local news picked it up, then regional stations, then national blogs. Someone had even created a remix of Vince falling into the artwork set to circus music. I was famous, or infamous, depending on your perspective. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Reporters, talk show producers, lawyers, and random people who'd seen the video and wanted to offer their opinions on my marriage. I turned it off and made coffee, enjoying the silence. Around noon, Pete showed up with a 6-pack of beer and an eat-ating grin. "You magnificent bastard," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. "You actually did it. You destroyed them both in front of the entire town." It was pretty satisfying, I admitted. But I'm not done yet. "What do you mean, dude?" "They're finished. Celia got fired this morning. I heard it from my cousin who works at the dealership. Vince's real estate office is getting calls from reporters. His wife filed for divorce. They're both radioactive." "Good, but that's not enough." Pete cracked open a beer and studied my face. "Nick, buddy, maybe it's time to let this go. You won, they lost. Mission accomplished." "No," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "They didn't just cheat on me, Pete. They were planning to steal money. They called me an idiot. They thought they could destroy my life and walk away clean. So, what's the end game here? What do you want?" I thought about it for a moment. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or just the satisfaction of knowing they'd paid a price for what they'd done? "I want them to lose everything," I said finally. "The way I lost everything when I found out about the affair. I want them to feel what it's like to have their world collapse." Pete nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do this smart. No more public spectacles, no more assault charges waiting to happen. We be surgical about it." Over the next few days, we put the final phase of our plan into motion. Pete's network of blue-collar contacts proved invaluable. Bartenders who'd overheard conversations, mechanics who'd worked on cars, waitresses who'd served intimate dinners. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Celia and Vince hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been systematically stealing from Prestige Motors for months. Fake invoices, inflated repair costs, kickbacks from suppliers. They'd been planning to disappear together once they'd accumulated enough money, leaving their spouses in the dealership to deal with the aftermath. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report and sent copies to the dealership's owner, the local police, and the state attorney general's office. I also sent a copy to Julia Hart's divorce attorney, just to make sure Vince didn't hide any assets before the settlement. But that still wasn't enough. On Friday evening, I drove to Vince's house in the upscale Millbrook Heights subdivision. It was a modern monstrosity, all glass and steel angles, designed to impress rather than welcome. The kind of house that screamed, "I have more money than taste." His silver Porsche sat in the driveway, still bearing the scars from our parking lot encounter. Someone had done a quick paint job, but you could still see the scratches if you knew where to look. I parked across the street and waited. Around 8, Vince emerged from the house carrying a suitcase. He loaded it into his car and drove away, probably heading to a hotel now that Julia had kicked him out. Perfect. I called Pete. "He's gone. Bring the supplies." 20 minutes later, Pete arrived in his pickup truck loaded with everything we'd need: banners, balloons, and a portable projector I'd borrowed from work. We worked quickly and quietly, transforming Vince's front yard into a shrine to his failures. The banner stretched across his garage reader in bright red letters. The balloons were black and gold funeral colors, and the projector aimed at his living room window displayed a continuous loop of his greatest hits from the charity gala. But the pièce de résistance was the lawn signs. dozens of them scattered across his perfectly manicured grass, each one bearing a different message. Home of Vincent Hart, adulterer. Ask me about my affair. Cheaters live here. Honk if you hate liars. By the time we finished, it looked like a political campaign had exploded in his front yard, a campaign for the world's worst human being. Think you'll get the message? Pete asked, admiring our handiwork. If he doesn't, I'll send it in skywriting next time. We were packing up our supplies when headlights swept across the yard. Vince's Porsche pulled into the driveway, and I could see his silhouette behind the wheel taking in the scene. He sat there for a full minute, engine running, probably trying to process what he was seeing. Then he got out of the car and walked toward us. "You," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "This ends now." "Actually," I replied, "I think it's just getting started." He took a swing at me, a wild, desperate haymaker that would have been embarrassing in a middle school fight. I ducked easily and caught him with an uppercut that sent him stumbling backward into his own front door. "Stay down, Vince," I advised. "You're embarrassing yourself." But he didn't stay down. He charged at me again, this time managing to grab my shirt before I could dodge. We grappled for a few seconds, two middle-aged men acting like teenagers before Pete separated us. "Enough!" Pete shouted, holding Vince at arm's length. "Both of you, knock it off!" Vince was breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion and humiliation. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you have." I laughed. "What are you going to take, Vince? My cheating wife? My destroyed marriage? My public humiliation? You already took all that. But here's the thing. I'm still standing, and you're the one covered in paint and shame. I'll sue you for harassment, for vandalism, for assault. Go ahead. I'll countersue for adultery, theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Let's see whose lawyer is better." He stared at me for a long moment, then looked at his decorated yard, then back at me. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you destroyed my life," I said. "Because you thought you could take my wife, steal from your employer, and walk away without consequences. Because you called me an idiot and thought I'd never figure it out. I never called you an idiot. No, but you thought it. Every time you looked at me, every time you shook my hand at some town event, every time you smiled and made small talk while you were screwing my wife behind my back. You thought I was just some pathetic computer nerd who'd never catch on." He didn't deny it. "Well, congratulations, Vince. You were wrong." I walked back to my car, leaving him standing in his ruined front yard, surrounded by the evidence of his failures. As I drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror, slowly taking down the balloons one by one. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. The next morning brought news that made everything worthwhile. Celia had been arrested on embezzlement charges. The evidence I'd provided had been enough for the police to get a warrant, and they'd found additional proof of the theft in her office computer. She called me from jail, crying and begging me to post bail. "I can't help you," I told her. "You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." "Nick, please. I made a mistake. I can fix this." "No, Celia, you can't fix this. You can't fix us. You can't fix anything. You're on your own now." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in months, the house was completely quiet. No lies, no secrets, no pretense. Just silence, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had finally been served. I thought it was over. I really did. Celia was facing embezzlement charges. Vince's real estate business had collapsed, and both of them were social paras in a town that thrived on gossip. I'd gotten my revenge, and it tasted sweeter than I'd imagined. But I'd underestimated their desperation. The attack came on a Tuesday morning while I was working in my home office. I heard cars in the driveway, multiple vehicles, which was unusual since I wasn't expecting anyone. Through my window, I saw Celia's BMW, followed by a white van and a black sedan. Celia emerged from her car looking like hell. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she'd lost weight in all the wrong places. The stress of the criminal charges and public humiliation had aged her 10 years in 2 weeks. Vince climbed out of the sedan, wearing a cheap suit that hung on his frame like a scarecrow's outfit. His silver Porsche was gone, probably repossessed, and his confident swagger had been replaced by the desperate shuffle of a man with nothing left to lose. The van disgorged a locksmith and a man in an expensive suit who could only be a lawyer. They were followed by Drea, who'd apparently decided to throw her lot in with the sinking ship. I watched from my office as they approached my front door. This should be interesting. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by aggressive knocking. I took my time answering, making sure to activate the security camera system I'd installed after the charity gala incident. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted it recorded.
"Nick," Celia said when I opened the door, "we need to talk."
"I don't think we do," I replied. "You're trespassing. Leave." The lawyer stepped forward, a thin man with predatory eyes and a briefcase full of trouble. "Mr. Ferris, I'm James Morrison representing Mrs. Ferris. We are here to reclaim property that rightfully belongs to my client."
"What property would that be?"
"This house. According to Connecticut law, your wife has a right to marital assets, including the family home. We have a court order requiring you to allow access." He handed me a folded document. I skimmed it quickly. Legal boilerplate about temporary restraining orders and asset preservation. It looked official, but something felt off about it. "This is interesting," I said, "but I think you might want to double-check your paperwork. This house is in my name only. I bought it before we were married, and it was never converted to joint ownership." The lawyer's confidence wavered slightly. That will need to be verified." "Feel free to verify it. In the meantime, you're all trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before I call the police." Vince stepped forward, his face flushed with anger.
"You think you can hide behind lawyers and technicalities? You destroyed my life."
"You destroyed your own life," I replied. "I just made sure everyone knew about it."
"We had a deal," Celia said suddenly. "You and I, 22 years of marriage. That has to count for something."
It did count for something until you decided to throw it away for a few months of excitement with Mr. Wonderful here. Drea finally spoke up, her voice shrill with desperation.
"You're being unreasonable, Nick. Celia made a mistake, but she's still your wife. You can't just destroy her over one affair."
"One affair?" I laughed. "Lady, your best friend was planning to steal money and disappear with her boyfriend. This wasn't a mistake. It was a criminal conspiracy." The locksmith cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but if there's a dispute about ownership, maybe I should wait in the van?" "Good idea," I said, "because you're not changing any locks on my property." That's when Vince made his second big mistake of our relationship. He tried to push past me into the house. "I'm not leaving until we settle this," he snarled, shoving against my shoulder. I'd been expecting something like this. Desperate people do desperate things, and Vince had nothing left to lose. But I'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "Actually," I said, stepping back and pulling out my phone, "I think you are leaving right now." I activated an app on my phone, and suddenly every smart device in my house came to life. The sound system began blasting audio from the charity gala, Vince's own voice declaring his love for Celia, followed by the sound of him crashing into the artwork. The smart TV in the living room lit up with a slideshow of their text messages. Even the doorbell camera started announcing their arrival to anyone within 100 yards. "Welcome to the Nick Ferris Show." My voice boomed from hidden speakers. "Tonight's guests are Celia the cheater, Vince the villain, and Drea the desperate. The lawyer jumped backward like he'd been electrocuted. The locksmith actually ran for his van, but Celia, Vince, and Drea were trapped on my front porch, surrounded by the evidence of their crimes and betrayals broadcast at maximum volume.
Turn it off!
Celia screamed, covering her ears. I don't think so, I replied, raising my voice over the cacophony. You wanted to come to my house and make demands? Fine. Let's give the whole neighborhood a show. And what a show it was. Within minutes, neighbors began emerging from their houses, drawn by the noise and spectacle. Mrs. Henderson from next door started filming with her phone. The teenage kids across the street gathered on their lawn like they were watching a concert. The audio system cycled through the greatest hits. Celia and Vince planning their romantic getaways, Drea gossiping about other people's marriages, Vince bragging about his sexual prowess, all of it broadcast in crystal-clear surround sound for everyone to hear. "This is harassment!" the lawyer shouted, trying to be heard over the chaos. "This is my property!" I shouted back. "And these are my speakers. If you don't like the music, you're free to leave." Vince tried to rush me again, but this time I was ready. I stepped aside and let his momentum carry him straight into the decorative fountain in my front yard. The splash was audible even over the sound system, and the crowd of neighbors erupted in laughter and applause. He came up sputtering, his cheap suit soaked and his dignity in tatters. "Again! You're insane," he gasped, water streaming from his hair. "I'm creative," I corrected. "There's a difference." Celia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks for the second time in 2 weeks. "Nick, please stop this. We can work something out." Work something out. I walked over to where she stood on my porch, trapped between the speakers and the growing crowd of spectators. "Sweetheart, we're way past working things out. You wanted to take my house? You wanted to humiliate me? Well, congratulations. You got your wish?" I pulled something from my pocket. Her wedding ring, the one I'd retrieved from the storm drain after our confrontation at the hotel. I held it up for everyone to see. 22 years ago, I gave this to a woman I thought I knew, a woman I thought loved me. Turns out I was wrong on both counts. I tossed the ring into the fountain where Vince was still standing. He looked down at it, then back at me, his face a mixture of rage and defeat. "Keep it," I told him. "Consider it a consolation prize." The sound system finally wound down, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the whispers and chuckles of my impromptu audience. The lawyer was already heading for his car, probably calculating how much distance he could put between himself and this disaster. The locksmith was long gone. "Show's over, folks," I announced to the crowd. "Thanks for coming. Don't forget to like and subscribe." Several people actually applauded. Mrs. Henderson gave me a thumbs up. The teenagers across the street started chanting, "Jerry, Jerry," again. Celia, Vince, and Drea stood on my lawn, looking like refugees from a natural disaster. Wet, humiliated, and completely defeated. "One more thing," I said, pulling out my phone again. "This whole encounter has been live-streamed to my Facebook page. So far, we have about 3,000 viewers. Smile for the camera." Drea actually covered her face and ran for the car. Vince followed, still dripping fountain water and muttering threats under his breath. Celia was the last to leave, standing on my lawn like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since the moment you decided to cheat. Everything since then has just been cleanup." She walked to her car with whatever dignity she had left, which wasn't much. As they drove away, the BMW, the sedan, and the lawyer's Mercedes, I waved goodbye like I was seeing off house guests after a pleasant visit. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several neighbors stopped to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd had enough of Vince Hart's arrogance and Celia's social climbing. "Hell of a show," Nick called out Bob Martinez from 2 houses down. "Better than cable TV." I grinned and headed back inside, already planning my next move, because despite what I'd told Celia, this really wasn't over. Not yet. The call came from my daughter Maddie at 11 that night. She was supposed to be studying for finals at NYU, but her voice was tight with excitement and anger.
Dad, you need to see this. I'm sending you an email right now.
Maddie, it's late. Can't this wait until—
No, it can't wait. Mom and that sleazeball aren't just cheaters. They're criminals. Real criminals.
I opened my laptop and found her email. Attached were dozens of documents, bank statements, invoices, correspondence between Celia and Vince. But these weren't the embezzlement records I'd already discovered. This was something bigger. "Where did you get these?" I asked, scrolling through the files.
Mom left some stuff at my dorm when she visited last month. Financial papers, insurance documents. I didn't think anything of it until I saw the news about her arrest. Then I started looking closer.
What I saw made my blood run cold. Celia and Vince hadn't just been stealing from Prestige Motors. They'd been planning to frame me for it. The documents showed a systematic plan to make me the fall guy for their embezzlement scheme. They'd opened bank accounts in my name, forged my signature on financial documents, and created a paper trail that would have led investigators straight to my door.
Dad, they were going to let you go to prison for their crimes.
I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. It wasn't enough that they'd destroyed my marriage and humiliated me publicly. They'd been planning to destroy my entire life, send me to jail for crimes I didn't commit while they disappeared with the stolen money. "How long have you known about this?" I asked.
I figured it out yesterday, but I wanted to be sure before I called.
Dad, there's more. I found evidence that they were planning to fake your suicide. The room spun around me. What? Insurance policies, forged suicide notes, even research into untraceable poisons. They weren't just going to frame you. They were going to kill you and make it look like you couldn't live with the guilt. 22 years of marriage, 22 years of sharing a bed, a home, a life with someone who'd been planning to murder me.
"I've already called the FBI," Maddie continued. "This crosses state lines, involves federal crimes. They're taking it seriously."
"Good girl," I managed to say. "Send everything to my lawyer, too. And Maddie." "Yeah, Dad. I'm proud of you. You probably just saved my life." After I hung up, I sat in my office, staring at the evidence of my wife's ultimate betrayal. The affair had been bad enough. The embezzlement had been worse. But attempted murder, that was in a league of its own. My phone rang. It was Pete. "Nick, you need to get down here now." "Where's here?" "The marina. Vince is trying to leave town. He's got a boat loaded with suitcases and what looks like a lot of cash." I grabbed my keys and drove to Millbrook Marina as fast as my Honda would carry me. Pete was waiting in the parking lot along with 2 FBI agents who'd apparently been tracking Vince since Maddie's call. Mr. Ferris. The senior agent was a woman in her 40s with steel gray eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen everything.
"I'm Agent Sarah Chen. We need to talk."
She filled me in quickly. Based on Maddie's evidence, they'd obtained warrants for both Celia and Vince. Celia was already back in custody, but Vince had slipped away from his hotel. A tip from Pete had led them here. "He's on that yacht," Agent Chen said, pointing to a sleek white boat moored at the end of the dock. 40-foot cigarette boat, fast enough to reach international waters before we could catch him. "What do you need from me?"
"Nothing.
Just stay back and let us handle this." But as we watched, Vince appeared on the boat's deck. Even from a distance, I could see he was agitated, moving quickly to untie the mooring lines. The boat's engines were already running.
"He's making a run for it,"
Agent Chen said into her radio.
Move in, now.
Federal agents emerged from hiding spots around the marina, but Vince saw them coming. He gunned the engines and pulled away from the dock, sending up a spray of water and diesel exhaust. For a moment, it looked like he might actually escape. The boat was fast, and he had a head start. But then something beautiful happened. The engines died. The yacht coasted to a stop about 50 yards from shore, dead in the water. Vince appeared on deck again, frantically trying to restart the engines. Nothing happened.
Mechanical failure?
Agent Chen asked. Pete grinned. More like mechanical sabotage. I may have paid a visit to that boat earlier today. Amazing how a little sugar in the fuel tank can ruin your whole day. The FBI agents exchanged glances. We didn't hear that, Agent Chen said. They arrested Vince on the water, hauling him back to shore in handcuffs while he screamed about his rights and demanded a lawyer. The boat was impounded along with 3 suitcases full of cash and a briefcase containing forged passports.
How much money?
I asked as they inventoried the evidence. Preliminary count shows about $200,000 in cash, Agent Chen replied, plus bearer bonds, jewelry, and what appears to be a list of offshore accounts. $200,000. Money stolen from Prestige Motors. Money that would have been blamed on me. Money that would have paid for their new life while I rotted in prison or lay dead in a fake suicide.
There's something else, Agent Chen said, pulling me aside. We found this in his briefcase.
She handed me a plastic evidence bag containing a small vial of clear liquid.
Preliminary field test shows it's ricin, extremely lethal, virtually untraceable if administered correctly.
The poison they'd planned to use on me, the final piece of their perfect crime. I stared at the vial, thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim instead of their nemesis. If I hadn't discovered the affair when I did, if I hadn't fought back, if Maddie hadn't found those documents.
Mr. Ferris, are you all right?
I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. What happens now? Now they both face federal charges: conspiracy, embezzlement, attempted murder, flight to avoid prosecution. They're looking at 25 to life minimum. 25 to life. It was more than I'd ever hoped for when this whole thing started. As the FBI agents led Vince away, he caught sight of me standing on the dock.
"This is your fault," he screamed. "You destroyed everything. You ruined my life."
"No, Vince," I called back. "You ruined your own life. I just made sure everyone knew about it." He was still screaming threats as they put him in the back of the federal vehicle. Something about how he'd get revenge, how he'd make me pay, how this wasn't over. But it was over. Finally, completely, satisfyingly over. The next morning brought news that Celia had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was going to testify against Vince, detailing their entire conspiracy from the affair to the planned murder. She called me one last time from federal detention.
"Nick, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know that I never wanted it to go this far."
"How far did you want it to go, Celia? Just the cheating? Just the stealing? Or were you okay with framing me for your crimes?"
"I was scared. Vince said it was the only way we could be together, and the poison."
"Were you scared when you researched ways to kill me?" Silence on the other end of the line.
"I loved you once,"
she said finally. "No, you didn't. You loved what I could provide. Security, respectability, someone to blame when your schemes went wrong. But you never loved me."
"That's not true."
"It is true, and you know what? I'm glad. Because the woman I thought I loved never existed. She was just a mask you wore to hide the monster underneath." I hung up and blocked her number. Whatever else happened, I never wanted to hear her voice again. That afternoon, I drove to the town square where a small crowd had gathered around the fountain. Someone had installed a plaque commemorating the Millbrook Charity Gala incident. It read, "On this site, Vincent Hart learned that gravity affects everyone equally." I couldn't help but smile. Even in a town full of gossips and social climbers, there was still room for justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "Saw the news. Proud of you, Dad. Mom and Vince got what they deserved." She was right. They had gotten what they deserved, not from some cosmic sense of justice, but from their own greed, stupidity, and underestimation of the man they'd tried to destroy. I walked back to my car, past the fountain where I'd thrown Celia's wedding ring, past the country club where their public humiliation had begun, past all the places where my old life had died and my new one had been born. 22 years of marriage, and it had ended with my wife in federal prison and her lover facing life behind bars. Not the ending I'd expected when I said "I do" all those years ago, but it was the ending they'd earned. As I drove home, I thought about what came next. The house would be quiet now. No more lies, no more secrets, no more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Just me, my daughter, who'd saved my life, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house that was finally, truly mine. No more joint ownership, no more shared mortgage, no more wondering what my wife was really doing when she claimed to be working late. My phone rang one last time. It was Agent Chen.
Mr. Ferris, I thought you'd want to know. Vincent Hart just agreed to plead guilty to all charges. He's looking at life without parole. And Celia? 25 years minimum.
With her cooperation, she might get out when she's 65. Maybe. I thanked her and hung up. Life without parole for Vince. 25 years for Celia. Justice served with a side of poetic irony. I got out of my car and walked to my front door, keys jingling in my hand. As I reached for the lock, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The house number, 247, cast a shadow on the door that looked like a middle finger. Even my house was telling Celia and Vince what I thought of them. I laughed out loud, unlocked the door, and stepped into my new life.